They're doing a little bit of research and they're looking at CLAS or CHIME or, other organizations they really trust. And they're saying these are clearly the top 2 or 3 players in this space. And I'm probably only going to look at them unless there's some really good reason to go out and look for options.
Hello and welcome to the Healthtech Marketing Show. I am your host, Adam Chirinas. I'm the CEO of Health Launchpad, and I'd like to welcome you to the show if this is your first time listening. By the way, you can subscribe to this podcast on any of your favorite podcast apps, and we're also on YouTube as well. Just search for the Healthtech Marketing Show. Big thank you to you for listening, and a big thank you to our sponsors, the wonderful people at HIMSS and also at Healthcare Now Radio. You can find out more about both these companies in the show notes. Today's episode is all about brand building, and sort of the brand has almost become like a dirty word in marketing. It feels like marketers are worried about bringing up the B word to the CEO. But let's face it, without a strong brand, healthcare buyers are just not going to put you on the shortlist. And so it is an absolutely critical issue. Today, I am very lucky to have on the guest a great friend of mine and a terrific marketer, Lea Chatham. Lea is the Director of Enterprise Marketing for Heidi Health, one of the fastest growing companies in the Ambient AI Scribe market. And she's going to talk about the brand issues that they face coming into the US market and how they approach that. And then she's going to dive deep into their strategy for building what is becoming one of the most successful healthcare technology brands. So with that, let's get on with the show. Hey, Lea, good to see you. It's always great having you on the show and catching up with you. Congratulations. It's so good seeing you in your relatively new role at Heidi Health. You seem to be riding the rocket ship there. They're doing incredibly well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's nice to be here too. It's always nice to get to catch up and hang out. It is definitely a rocket ship.
And a lot of really interesting brand issues. Let's break it down. I want to start off with the lay of the land. And, you recently gave a presentation to the Healthtech Marketing Network on what you're learning from a brand perspective with Heidi, and didn't share it, it was a lot of vast experience. I thought it was an interesting observation about how larger buying groups are choosing the top 2 to 3 invisibly. And in your category, where it's like, it's it's kind of a land grab right now, right? There's a handful of players, maybe a dozen companies, everyone trying to be like the first or second company in the door so that you can lock up the market between you guys. So it's really important.
Yeah. I mean, I think what we've seen coming out of research, some of which I know you've presented in the past, is really, HIMSS does an annual report. There's stuff coming out from organizations outside of healthcare, like Sixth Sense or Demandbase, that are kind of looking at what's happening in terms of buying at the C-suite level in particular. We see it also from some of the persona work that comes out from groups like the Health Management Academy, that, CIOs are getting hundreds, if not thousands of emails a day. And a lot of that is just going straight into the trash. Right? This like C-suite buying group of CFOs, CIOs, CMIOs, CNIOs, right, who are making these decisions. One has gotten bigger, I think, partly because CIOs now control more of the process and the budget for everybody. So if you are in a certain department or group, you've got the people in your group who are decision makers. And then, of course, you've got kind of a C-suite group of people that you have to go to for approval. So CIO, CFO. And if it's a very large purchase, sometimes the CEO or the board gets involved, or, there's so many different sort of scenarios there. But all the research is kind of telling us that there's so much noise out there that these buyers really are just looking for trusted sources that give them the top 2 or 3, right? They're doing a little bit of research and they're looking at CLASS or CHIME or, other organizations they really trust. And they're saying these are clearly the top 2 or 3 players in this space. And I'm probably only going to look at them unless there's some really good reason to go out and look at options. And so you got to be in there or you're probably not making the list.
You're the relatively new kid on the block, which means that you were the new entrants year 2 of this market, right? So the first year was Nuance with DAX and a bridge. You literally can't go to an IT publication without seeing an abridged ad, or at least it felt that way. The Scribe, former client of ours, love those guys, Nabla, all those guys. And so you're relatively new and you're coming at it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
And so what were some of the sort of brand barriers that you've had coming into this market?
Yeah. So we are coming from kind of a different angle, and it has created some brand barriers as we look towards the larger enterprise and bigger kind of mid-market, big specialty practices, things like that. It's been very helpful in coming into the market at more the direct-to-physician sort of small practice approach. And Heidi has had a very successful history of coming into markets with that sort of product-led, physician-led growth. And they worked their way up from the bottom. And that's worked really, really well for them and made them incredibly successful globally. It does work to some degree in the sense that it is all about physician experience, which is a great story to be able to tell at the enterprise level. The barrier has really been that when people are looking in the market, it looks very much like Heidi's a sort of small practice, individual physician, freemium kind of model. And so when you tell someone that you're in the enterprise space and you have enterprise customers or you're trying to build that enterprise business, people are a little bit incredulous, sort of like, what? It doesn't look like you're in the enterprise space, right? Everything is about sort of sign on for free and try us for free and do all those things. So there's some upsides and some downsides. But the big downside really was every time I kind of went out to talk to someone, their first response would be, it doesn't look like you guys work in enterprise, because all of your messaging is very direct to physician and very sort of start for free and see how you like it. Yeah. So that was really sort of like, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to take this same obsession with physician experience, but translate that into how it's relevant when you're talking to C-suite buyers in a large health system? And so coming up with kind of that framework and that messaging and sort of maturing the brand so it really looked like it could support that was a big thing.
Well, we're going to dive into that in a little while. Before we do that, I want to kind of, you're a clear perspective about where the brand stands. And that's sort of interesting. I'd say the early part of my career in consumer product marketing, and there were brand studies. So used to call UNA studies, usage and attitudes. And, they were quite expensive. It was like one of the biggest costs that the expenses that the companies had was actually hiring these really experienced research companies to measure their brand and brand awareness and brand familiarity and how your brand stacks up against the competitors. And I can tell you, 5 years in this, 6 years of doing health tech marketing, or at least running a health launchpad, I haven't seen anybody do anything like that. How do you, other than talking to customers, which is a great way of doing it.
Yeah.
Is there a quantitative way of doing it? You seem to have pretty confident in where you think you guys stand.
Yeah. I mean, so there's some free tools. There are free versions of paid tools, and there are paid tools like you can use to start getting a sense of share of voice. So you've got these sort of more share of voice PR type solutions like Muckrack and Meltwater, things like that, which most PR companies use. And then a lot of companies will also have an account for themselves, right? You can look at yourself against competitors and get a feel for sort of your share of voice in the market as it relates to kind of media. And then you have some that are more about your kind of authority and the quality of the content you have from a website perspective. So like a SEMrush or a Moz, where you can see kind of how you stack up in terms of authority and, how your website ranks. And then, of course, you have kind of your Google tools, which will sort of tell you how you're doing from a search perspective, where you're showing up, right? Those things. There's also some tools. We've just been using one for a few months that are specifically to track AI SEO. So focused more on prompts
Yes, really. You know, which tools?
We're using Peak AI, P-E.
I think I've heard that one. Yeah.
So for a few of them, it focuses on sort of how you stack up against your competitors based on prompts and where those prompts kind of take people and the sources. So, some of it is looking at all of those things. And I think in the last 5 or 10 years, we've just got a lot more tools like that, right? Which are free or low cost or come with other solutions you have. So you can kind of get a feel for some things there. And then I also think we've seen a transition in the market where we used to have to go to big kind of analytics firms to do these brand surveys, right? And they were very expensive. Any kind of survey was expensive. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, we would do big consumer or physician studies and you'd pay $50 or $100,000 and you had this company come in. It took 6 months and it was really, really big undertaking. But now a lot of the media groups that work in healthcare offer solutions for doing these brand surveys that are much more affordable. It's repeatable for them, right? So they do it with a lot of their clients. They're 5 or 10 questions. It takes like 5 minutes. They push it out at the beginning of the relationship and kind of at the end of the relationship. And they're sort of incentivized to make that relatively affordable for you because they're trying to prove their own worth by doing that, right? So you're signing on for 6 or 12 months with them to do a package of media, advertising and syndication and all that kind of stuff. Adding that in at a fairly low cost is good. It's good for them as it is for you, right? And so specific to healthcare and healthcare buyers, now you can do something with a HIMSS or, MGH publications or someone like that and get
by that.
Yeah. And so, I think that is an option now that used to be kind of unattainable for a lot of companies because it was just out of reach from a budget perspective. And that's now an option for more people because it is more affordable.
There's one other one I've thrown into the mix that I took a look at about 6 months ago called Blue Ocean AI, a really interesting venture-backed Silicon Valley-based, San Francisco-based company. And they look at signals. You figure out the attributes that are most important to you.
Yeah.
And they look broadly at signals. Like, what are people talking about? So it's very much sort of based on conversations and all sorts of different ways of doing a lot of what you described, which is using other proxies rather than actually going out and sort of running a quantitative customer survey to get at it. I thought it was a really interesting.
I'll have to check that out because I think there are a lot more. Honestly, I think you can use a number of AI tools you could use if you didn't have the budget and you just wanted to get a little bit of understanding of sentiment, right? If you could create the right prompts around sort of how often is this showing up here and, around these topics, what are kind of the key things, right? I mean, there's stuff you could do from a prompts perspective, I think, in a lot of tools that would allow you to fill in some of the gaps, right, for yourself a little bit.
I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable spot, and so you don't have to answer this question, but I'm curious about how you see the landscape of AI scribes and sort of what are the relative positionings of the various players in the market?
Yeah, so this is actually something we talk about a lot, and our CEO has a pretty clear kind of perspective on this. And so we've all spent a lot of time listening to him sort of talk about this topic. And I think really where we sit today is there's kind of two approaches to ambient AI. One is really based on kind of the US sort of traditional procurement model, which is building solutions that are very much tightly tied to the EHR and are really kind of almost embedded in the EHR workflow. And, obviously the upside of that is we've sort of been trained in the US to focus on integrations and focus on trying to keep everything very EHR centric. And so you get that kind of embedded feel. The downside of that is that you're very limited to what is available to you within your EHR, right? And you're sort of limited to the structure of the note. For a lot of physicians, there are a lot of other things they'd like to be able to do with the data that they have and the note information that they have. And so the other bucket of scribes are the ones that are kind of untethered from the EHR, where integration is kind of a last step. It's the thing you add on at the end. But most of what happens is happening in the scribe. it is a much more flexible, customizable, personalizable solution because you're not tied to the fields of the EHR at the beginning. You can take all that data and information and then use it as the foundation to do all kinds of AI driven tasks. So you can then do patient calls. You can create a task list of things like care coordination letters, patient explainers, prior authorization, right? All these other things. And it kind of allows you, and you sort of have the ability to collaborate across your team and do all these things. And then you sort of add in the integration piece at the end that's sort of like send just this stuff over to the note, right, where it goes, or send this coding piece over where it goes. And so we've really taken the position of creating the most customizable, flexible, usable solution is the priority. And that whole idea of being really clinician obsessed, really obsessed with adoption, sort of driving from the bottom up and getting a lot of interest and people saying, we like this one better, is kind of the approach that we've taken. I think the other advantage of that is from the beginning, our founders knew that eventually Oracle and Epic and Veradigm, everybody would have their own solutions, right? And so you want to build something that offers more value than just what you get from the EHR because you want to be able to compete against that. And if you're really deeply embedded in the EHR, you're heavily dependent on those partners to keep you as a partner.
Well, your market, there's, God, what a case study in be careful who you partner with, right? Because you've got Nuance and the Bridge who had the advantage of being Epic's chosen partner. And then Epic says, well, we're actually now launching it. And so suddenly it's like you're in bed with a company that could potentially kill you. And so I think you're in a position, it sounds like your mode is independence and actually sort of like, sure, you can integrate it, but actually we're designing this. Our moat is physicians love us.
Right. Well, and I think as an Australian company, if you want to be big, you have to think global. And so that was also the intent from the beginning, right? Untethered from EHRs, but also from any particular specialty or any sort of structure of healthcare, which really allowed them to sort of watch for high adoption in that direct to physician motion and then say, now what do we need to become the most adopted, most successful scribe in this market? So for example, in the UK, medical scribes are regulated like devices, medical devices.
Oh, right.
Go into the UK, if you want to be successful in the UK, you have to go through the process of becoming certified as a medical device. Because Heidi's taken that approach of, hey, we're seeing enough adoption here to really invest in this market. Let's do all the things we need to do. They've been able to do that. And now they're used by, I think the last number I saw was 2 out of 3 GPs in the UK use Heidi. We're one of only 3 scribes, I think, that are approved in the UK. So, it allows you to really ramp up in that space because you are open to doing kind of whatever needs to happen. It's also made us, I think, the most secure scribe because we're in so many markets worldwide that you're meeting these really strict regulatory medical device and GDPR. So coming to the US, it's not nearly as strict as an environment, but we have this level of security for those stricter markets, right?
It's interesting, right? Because I find that the US healthcare technology market is very US centric. And so being a global company in many markets and many technology markets is a huge advantage. And I actually think it's not an advantage. It's frankly, if you're coming from overseas, it's actually a disadvantage to you, more of a disadvantage than is in any other market.
An adjustment period, right?
Whereas I think you guys have clearly got a story that works really well and that you're using the experience and the testing and the battle testing that you're getting in these other markets to make a stronger product. So good for you.
Yeah. And I think that's also been helpful in the sense that we sort of crowdsource templates too. So we're in over 100 different countries and 200 specialties, and we're crowdsourcing templates and workflows and information across all those specialties and countries. So whether you're in the US or the UK or Australia or Germany, wherever you are, you've got all this stuff that you can kind of work. You can see other people's sort of best practices and ideas and the things that they've tried, right? And the US is a big market in both ways, in the sense that it's a big market in the direct-to-physician small practice, as well as in the enterprise and the big sort of PE-backed kind of specialty and all that stuff. So, we have seen huge momentum in the direct-to-physician piece here, even more than other countries, because the US is so much bigger, which has also given us the opportunity to build out a lot of templates and workflows, look at the billing pieces here, right? Kind of work through those things and have a pretty high rate of adoption even before kind of going into the bigger organizations. And now we are in several larger organizations. So we're really getting to battle test all that in the bigger enterprise groups, right? And tweak and adjust and make sure it kind of works in all the environments.
Let's change gears a bit. I want to get into the brand strategy part of what you do. So how are you guys approaching brand strategy? How are you defining the messaging? How are you systematizing it? Sort of talk about that from a sort of a structural standpoint.
Yeah. So it's, that's an interesting challenge in an international company. So we do have a global head of product marketing and a global head of brand. And they really have worked on, we just went through a huge rebranding back at the end of September, beginning of October. And so all those teams kind of working together on, what we needed to do to kind of level up the brand so that it would feel less like a direct-to-physician freemium model and a little more like we are an AI care partner for anyone in any role in healthcare in any size of organization. So it was really making that transition from we're just an AI scribe for physicians to we are truly like your AI care partners sitting at the side of any clinical provider, physicians, nurses, pharmacists, allied health, all these things in any kind of organization. And so the shift in the message really was we are a much broader solution meant for all, successful in all environments. And I think they did a very good job of making that transition. And I think all of the brand language and the new website, all those things really tell that story of AI care partner across the entire visit, any type of provider. Where it gets a little tough is if you are in 100 different countries and you're in, say, 10 countries, pretty like the top scribe or the second, like in the top two, in, 5 or 10 countries worldwide, whoever is sort of working in those markets where we actually have full sort of teams of people and we're really out in the field constantly working in those markets has to then kind of take that and make sure it speaks to your market, right? Because the selling to the NHS in the UK is very different. Even if the core brand is the same, the process of marketing and selling to the NHS is different than
very different
selling to academic medical centers here in the US. And so figuring out how to sort of walk a little bit of a fine line of this is the brand, this is how we talk about the brand, this is who we are, but saying it in a way that resonates with a CIO at an academic medical center is the piece that is each person who's running kind of a market has to figure out, right? And I think they've been very good at bringing in people like me in each market who have lots of experience in that market, kind of working in marketing or sales, right? And figuring that out.
So there's an essence to the brand globally, which is about basically preferred by all the clinicians,
Yep.
but you're tailoring how you bring that to market according to the individual market.
Yeah. Because I think, and sort of a little bit who you're talking to, because the teams that kind of run that direct to physician marketing focus just on the direct to physician marketing. And the people like me are focused on more of a marketing and sales led motion that's about selling into the C-suite, really understanding what their challenges are, because it's very different. If I'm a physician and I'm looking for a solution for myself, I care about my own sort of time and the care of my patients. It's not that a C-suite person doesn't care about that, but they also care about what is the impact to my organization as a whole, right? What is the impact to my budget? Can you show me ROI? Do you have social proof, right? Are you ranked by class? Are you involved with these, right? There's all these other things.
Are you high cross certified? Are you, where's compliance, all that.
So you have to think just a little bit differently about what do they care about. At the end of the day, it's all about better patient care, better physician experience.
Yeah.
But the pieces that matter around that are different. If you're just a physician getting something for yourself versus a CIO looking for something that's going to work across 10,000 providers, in 3 states or whatever.
So tactically, how does that manifest itself? Like, how do you make sure that, brand new sales guy hired in the Northwest of the US talks about the brand in a consistent way than a product marketing person in Australia? How does the company do that?
This is my day-to-day challenge is that, right? Taking things that are being initially kind of created for everyone and then figuring out, literally going through things sometimes line by line and saying like, no, that does not resonate in the US. No, we don't use those words. No, that statistic doesn't work well here. Kind of doing the stuff that's kind of across the US. And then there's a piece that actually is sort of, and this is true whether you're an international company or not, in the piece that goes from your bigger brand story to thinking about ICPs and personas and specific markets in the US. There's always that piece that is about laying out your plan or your storylines or your themes or, kind of your messaging to specific person. Like if you're targeting a CIO at an academic medical center, that's might be slightly different than, say in like New York versus a children's hospital in Seattle, right? So you might have like some of the language changes even in there a little bit from, like I've always historically worked really hard to get to the place, and sometimes it takes a couple of years, but to get to the place where you have these kind of mapped out buyer journeys with the content that you need for your top 3 or 4 personas, but also the top 3 or 4 types of organizations. So you might have like a CMIO, a CIO, a CFO in academic. You might have the same, but in children's hospitals, and the same, and then you might have just a head of IT and a CEO in smaller regional, like rural markets, right? I think your goal is to get to that place where you can translate the big picture brand story down into what are the key things for kind of each of these different ICPs and personas, what they care about. Yeah. Yeah. That's where you want to get to. I think that is really the daily kind of slog for any head of marketing.
Yeah.
Right. To get the mix of content, mix of topics. Like
it's so hard in a fast growing company, which is expanding on so many fronts and bringing on new people to have that consistency. I'm going to date myself here, but I worked at Ogilvy. Back then it was Ogilvy and Mather. And when they won the IBM account, which was in the 90s, like probably the biggest agency account win of the decade, it was actually on the news because Ogilvy was pitching to Microsoft and Bill Gates was stopped at Comdex. Remember Comdex, the big computer show? And a journalist went up to them and said, did you know that Ogilvy and Mather just won the IBM account globally? And Bill Gates didn't. And he was very annoyed about it. And so that was, it was a big deal, but it was like global news. It was amazing. Anyway, one of the things that they were dealing with as a brand issue was the inconsistency. And there was this very famous chart that Abby Konstam, the former head of marketing, had, which was she had a PowerPoint chart with over 100 different IBM logos. And each one was like, OS2 and this instance over here and this thing of the Belgian market, and it was just like, it said IBM and it had the little the pinstripes in it, and most of them were blue but not all of them. It was just a complete mess. And so that she just said, cross that out. It's like boom, IBM. And so in fact one of the reasons why they hired Ogilvy globally was to be an army of brand enforcement.
Yeah.
Because it's the only way that they figured that they could actually get the companies to change was to get Ogilvy to essentially enforce it on their behalf.
It's incredibly hard. And if you're in a lot of different markets and you're trying to both keep a very consistent brand look and feel and core overarching story, and trying to sort of fit that market and address the needs of teams that are selling into different, and I'll date myself too. When I was at Medical Manager Health Systems and we were bought by WebMD, we had a chart like that was also like all the, they wanted us to rebrand to WebMD Practice Services. And we had just bought a ton of companies that were like smaller practice management companies and services companies and value resellers. And they all had their own things. And, we would same thing, like tons of different company names, tons of different logos, looks and feel, right? And we had like 10 different print newsletters we put out every quarter. We were doing all these things. It was insane, sort of the mess of stuff that we had to go through to rebrand everything to a consistent name. And then we rebranded again a year later to MDON. So twice in less than 18 months. And we launched MDON Network Services, which became part of Change, when Change was the sort of two main companies came together.
Another brand, I know. Whoa.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it was like we did it twice in 18 months, and it was so intense. It literally just took over your whole life. It's so hard to get that consistency. And it's one of the reasons I've always been a big fan of not naming everything. Companies that come up with like catchy product names for every single component or product they have, because it does start to kind of dilute your brand and create a lot more complexity. And it gets harder and harder to sort of tell the story in a really clean way. One of the things I actually love about Heidi is it's sort of like it's Heidi. It's Heidi's your partner, right? And you talk about different feature launches. We've just in the process of launching our calls feature, which is sort of an agentic, clinical calls tool. We've got a tasks feature, but really those names are sort of like, Heidi's calls feature, Heidi's task feature. It's not naming a whole new name to a product, which allows you to stay pretty focused on these are just additional features we're constantly adding to further build out this idea of Heidi by your side as a care partner across the visit, right? And that's the core story. And then from that core story, you can start adding on those things that are like, okay, what are all the ways we can show kind of social proof and the places we need to be and the rankings and the analysts and the ratings and, those kinds of things. But your core story sort of stays the same. Mm-hmm. And you're just adding additional features and tools, not whole new, products. And because it starts to it gets tough. There's a point at which you're like, I can't even keep track of like all of the product names.
So what are the, as you're building the Heidi brand in the US, what are the tactics that you're using?
So I'm really using kind of a similar approach to what I have done in the past in this sort of working in this same market, right? Especially enterprise, which is that there are very clearly several places you kind of have to be, right? And when you break that down into buckets, you sort of have a media, earn, paid, own kind of media bucket. You have kind of an analyst and similar. So there's, we have analysts like Gartner and Forrester and Frost and Sullivan and Chillmark and all that. Yeah. But then you also have these other organizations like CLASS or the Health Management Academy or Avia that are a little bit, they're sort of like that, but they're not, traditional. It's not like McKinsey. They're not like a traditional kind of consultancy or like Gartner, where it's really, an analyst thing. So you sort of have this bucket that covers all those. Then there's another bucket that is kind of ratings and reviews and more customer driven kinds of content, and then events, of course. So I always come in kind of with these buckets and really like analyze all the places you kind of need to be within those. And then kind of plan out, okay, so we maybe for the coming year have our overarching story, but what are the key sort of feature releases or key core topics that are really big right now that from a kind of a theme or campaign storytelling perspective, we need to be working around for the year. So you might have 2, 3, or 4 sort of campaigns across the year that touch on some of those important key things, whether that's product releases or it's kind of the hot topic of the moment. And then trying to lay out a plan that ensures you're kind of in all those places so that you know that you're consistently getting in front of the buyers you're trying to reach, right? So it's like, if you're targeting CIOs, you have to be at CHIME, you have to do CLASS, right? There are certain things you just have to do. And it's really thinking about it like that. And then the second piece is sort of, if you're very unknown and a new brand to the market, how much do you have to invest in the brand awareness component of that in terms of extra maybe spend that you're spending just to kind of raise the level of overall awareness? And that's more like maybe advertising spend or booth spend or spend at shows. That's a little more about visibility. but you're trying to kind of balance, like you've talked about with other people on the show, and I've talked about before, whether you call it brand gen or branded demand or whatever, where you're trying to balance that you need to still be filling your pipeline. So you got to be doing those lead gen things.
Yeah.
With like, we're trying to create visibility, but visibility in the right places, right? Where the people you want to see you can see you. So it's a lot of, kind of like nuance of how much do we put here and how much do, we have to be in these places, but how much do you sort of invest in each one, right? To balance out that demand piece and the brand awareness piece.
Yeah, there was Kristen Russell on the show a while back, and she talked about this notion, which called branded demand. And I thought, it's really interesting. I've never heard, it's like in all these years in marketing, I've never heard that term. And I thought it's a really interesting term. And it's that notion of the sort of chocolate and the peanut butter and the peanut butter and the chocolate that, if you're doing this well, everything that you do that's brand building, should drive demand, and anything that you do that's demand generation should contribute to the brand as well. And I really did like that way of thinking about it. So I've got in my head that what you've got is a metrics of like, here are the key stakeholder groups we've got to influence. So there's the buyers.
Yep.
Then there's the key people who influence the buyers.
Yep.
And then there's the buyer journey. And then you've got to have like check the box to make sure that you've got dollars in each bucket.
Yep.
And that you've got tactics and messages in each bucket.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think sort of like, interesting.
And it does. I mean, I think, I've said this before. I say it kind of all the time, and I'm sure people get sick of it, but really at the end of the day, marketing is like 80% of that. Like you're planning, you're setting up all these tables and you're kind of planning all these things and you're researching and you're trying to figure out like, where are you today and where do you want to be tomorrow? And where will you get the most kind of bang for your buck in terms of certain brand things versus lead gen, right? And it's a lot of like matrices of, of research and analysis and planning. And it's like 20 or 25% sort of fun, like campaign creation or, fun, like visuals and videos and all that kind of stuff. It's a lot of analyzing and like noodling around on like, maybe I should move this here. And, maybe that's not a checklist. It's a video. Like just trying to sort of get the right balance of all the things in all the places, at the right amount of money, right? Everybody has a budget. Everybody's got sort of a limit on what they can spend. So it's like trying to figure out all those balancing pieces. And,
you mentioned, I think you talked about SEO and I'm curious of that. How are you adapting to how buyers are using AI in the way that they do their research?
Yeah. So that is, we did sign on for one of the solutions that kind of tracks AI SEO and prompt use and those kinds of things. It's taken a little bit of time to sort of get that going and see really the kind of what's happening in the market with us and our competitors in each region and kind of what the prompts are. But, similar to sort of traditional SEO research, the goal is to kind of figure out again, like what are those, they're prompts in AI, but it's like, they're like your keywords or key phrases, right? What are the questions people are asking? And then how can you create the content that will get picked up by those AI? So sometimes just creating traditional SEO content where it's like top 5, whatever, or why should you do X? You have to start reframing a little bit the way you ask the question or the way you title things. So we're just in the process now of really getting a feel for what are the most common prompts that we're seeing sort of in those AI search things, and how do we need to start restructuring the way we're storytelling and the way we're kind of writing our content to make sure that it gets picked up, right?
I've been pleasantly surprised at when you take exactly that approach of thinking through what are the questions that they're asking, the sort of the way that they're putting prompts into ChatGPT. And if you start creating content that's really well optimized for that, how quickly you can get cited. We actually had, in the area that's particularly important area for us, which is ABM in healthcare. Mm-hmm. And so testing out a few prompts, we wrote a piece of content, which is specifically about how do you do account-based marketing in healthcare. We saw it come up cited in the prompts within 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's amazing. It is amazing, like how fast.
You get it right. You can do it. You do it right. Okay.
It's definitely faster than traditional SEO, right? Like in terms of when you make a shift or a change or you adjust something, the result shows up much faster than traditional.
Well, it actually reminds me of the early days of SEO. I've got this a long
Before it took like 6 months to see all the change.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, so God, this is like completely off topic, but one of my passions, as anybody watching this on YouTube will see, is that one of my passions is sailing. And I had this blog, I still around, called Messing About in Sailboats. And I wrote a post called Why Do Sailing Websites Sucks Except for Blogs? And I thought it's sort of, and it was fairly early and I wasn't getting any traction with the blog. And I thought, I'm going to give up. So, you know what, I'll write this one post. It's a bit spiky. We'll see what happens. It got so much traction that it was, if you Googled sailing websites, it was the number one post that came up for about 4 or 5 years. And that's because I got in early.
Yeah.
And then, now it's like, that blog doesn't come up at all. But
in the age of AI, things definitely move faster.
They do.
In marketing, in technology, I mean, in all things, it's like what took a year takes 2 days. I mean, it just
exactly.
totally different, totally different world. Yeah.
Well, Lea, this has been such an interesting conversation, and wow, what an exciting place that you've landed. I'm so happy for you. So, all right, last question. So what advice would you give other people in your shoes trying to build a brand in the current healthcare environment?
Well, I mean, I think the big one would be probably you're going to have to spend some money. You're going to have to you can't start out from scratch organically and move quickly. So when you do this kind of analysis about okay, where are the places we need to be and what do we need to do and what are the storylines and how do we, tell this story, you should probably look for organic opportunities. Obviously get in at the ground level on trying to get organic speaking or organic media or whatever. But also I would strongly recommend thinking about what are the couple of places where you could double down with some extra effort and some extra spend that would have the biggest impact the fastest, right? So for us, it was very quickly trying to build a strong relationship with CHIME. We have this handful of enterprise customers and a few of them were CHIME members. And we were able to work with them to apply for one of CHIME's kind of biggest, most high profile awards. And it was a risk, we put all this time into it and we're, paying for the CHIME relationship and paying for some additional sponsorships, doing these things. But it did pay off in that we did end up winning the award. We got a huge recognition around what we had done for those clients and the results that they had seen. And all that's now been published out in multiple places. So if you can find a few things like that will deliver a huge lift in a really short amount of time, make some extra investment in time, effort, and money. And, if one or two of those pay off while you're doing all this other on the ground kind of organic work, you will likely see a big boost from one or two big high profile events where maybe you go big, or one or two high profile awards or analyst opportunities where you go big. That will then help bump you quite a bit higher up than you would have gotten without them.
That is a great focus piece of advice, and I think a great place to end a terrific discussion. Lea, thank you.
I know. Thanks for having me, Adam. That was fun.
I did love talking to Lea. She's always so enthusiastic about marketing in our space and so knowledgeable. So I've got 4 key takeaways from you. So first of all, topic that keeps coming up, and that is that the modern buying group wants a trusted shortlist. When they start their research on who they're going to select for whatever it is that they're selecting, they're usually starting with 3 or 4 brands at most, and they've probably got a favorite when they get started. So you've got to get yourself on the map before they start their journey. Secondly, brand maturity matters, and enterprise buyers need different signals than physicians. So for a company like Heidi Health, what that means is that, you can build a groundswell of interest by showing the physicians how wonderful a product it is for them. But you, of course, have to meet the requirements of the enterprise buyers. So that is a bit of a tightrope for Heidi Health, but they seem to be doing a good job with it. The one which is sort of unique to Heidi Health in their market is that global brands need local adaptation. And I think it was really interesting how Heidi Health is essentially got a consistent brand story globally, but is adapting it to the needs of the local market. And in the US, that means you've got to adapt it to different audiences. You've got to adapt it to different market segments, and you've got to adapt it to the competitors that you're dealing with. And the last point is AI-driven search, or AEO, GEO, AIO, whatever your favorite 3-letter acronym in for this, must be a priority for you. If you get it right, you can make a big impact quickly. And for anyone that's building a brand, being able to actually understand what the prompts are that the buyers are putting into these LLMs, by understanding and creating content that's going to get cited, is going to get you a competitive advantage quickly. So I hope that you got as much out of that conversation as I did. By the way, if you thought this was a good show and that you think that one of your peers, one of your teammates will enjoy it, please go ahead and send it to them. I'd be grateful to you. And I'm hoping that they will be too. And again, don't forget, you can subscribe to it. I've got one favor to ask you, which is that if you like the show, please, please, please give us a positive rating. You can do that in your app. It's a little complicated, but I'd really appreciate it if you take the time to do it, or give us a thumbs up on YouTube. By the way, if you've got a question or you've just got something on your mind that you're kind of wrestling with right now, I'd be delighted to chat with you about it. There's nothing for sale here. This is not a sales call. I'm just happy to have a conversation with you about whatever are the challenges that you're dealing with from a marketing standpoint. And you can book a call with me through a link down below in the show notes. So with that, I will bid you farewell and hope to see you on the next episode.